There are several eye-catching new features in the new FabFilter Pro Q4, but after 1 month of use, which will I give a pass and which a fail? This video is sponsored by DistroKid. Follow the VIP link in the description down below to get 7% off an already amazing price to distribute your music to the world. Just like Pro Q3, Pro Q4 has dynamic EQ, essentially giving us the ability to either compress or expand the frequencies within that range. I've always found it incredibly useful. However, there's been one main flaw, and that's that the attack and release time for these dynamic EQ bands was set automatically. If you wanted to have direct control over this, you needed to use another plugin, and many of us would use something like the free Nova from Tokyo Dawn Records for this. And in here you can see we have direct control in milliseconds over the attack and release. So I was pleased to see that with Pro Q4 we now have controls for attack and release. If we go down to the bottom here and expand this area, you can see the attack and release knobs here. Awesome, or so I thought. The reality is the attack and release times are still set automatically by the plugin. They're what you call program dependent times, so they depend on the material that the plugin is processing. But we can, however, adjust those 50% in either direction for attack and release. And you can see me doing that down here, and you can see it having an effect here on this signal. So we've got a quick attack there, and then if I put it up in the other direction, you can see there the slow attack. What exactly this is a percentage of, I'm not entirely sure, to be honest with you, but I do know we can make it faster and slower. It's okay, but I much rather would have seen a setting in milliseconds like we've seen on other plugins, or at least a switch to, switch between program dependent and fully manual. That would have been lovely to see, but unfortunately that's not the way they did it. Now, before I give my verdict on the improvements here for dynamic EQ, there's just one other thing I want to talk about with it, and this is this switch here. Normally the trigger for this is going to be the frequency range itself, okay? But if we click on this switch down here, we can set this to free, and we can change where the trigger points are in terms of frequencies. So we could choose some higher frequencies up here to actually trigger the dynamic EQ like so, and you can see it's hardly being triggered at all there with that range that I'm setting. Now this becomes particularly handy for me when I'm actually using sidechain compression, for example. And how do I know this is useful to me? Well, because I've already been using this feature in another free plugin called ZL Equalizer. You can see that over here. They've got a similar ability here to be able to change the frequencies which are triggering the dynamic EQ. So overall, is this a pass or fail for me? Well, I think on balance, these new features are in fact a pass. I'm very glad to see they're here. I can affect the attack and release, and I can affect where I'm triggering the actual dynamic EQ here in terms of a frequency range. But I think the implementation of the attack and release is a little bit poor in my opinion. So it's only just a pass, even though it's a pass. Up until this version, this plugin has been completely clean, meaning it hasn't added anything like harmonic distortion. But that's changed with this version with character modes. It's on clean at the moment, but I can switch it to subtle or warm as well. Now you can't quite see me changing that. It's a little bit off screen at the moment, but you can see a little indicator at the bottom right here. The two orange lights that you can see here indicate I'm on the warm setting. If I'm on the subtle setting, there'll be one orange light, and when I'm on the clean setting, then we won't see any orange lights at all. Now what I'm going to do now is play some acoustic guitar, and I'm going to invite you to shut your eyes for a moment and have a listen as I switch between these different modes and see what you hear in terms of the difference. Now, I want you to be completely honest here, if not with me, with yourself. If I hadn't told you that I would be switching these modes, would you have detected any difference in the character of this acoustic guitar? Because I'm going to be completely honest with you now, I don't think I would have noticed even a little bit. Why is that? Well, I think it's because it's so subtle. Let's kind of see how subtle it is. I'm going to mute this acoustic guitar at the moment, and I'm going to run a tone generator through this plugin. We can see it here. It's playing a sine wave at 100 hertz. So we can do some nice, easy math if we see any odd and even harmonics being added. So we're on the clean mode at the moment. I will switch to subtle and we'll have a look and see if anything's happening there. I can't see anything at the moment. If it is, it might be just out of range. I'll switch now to warm, and here we much more obviously see a 200 hertz harmonic being added there, so an even harmonic. Okay, so what was happening there with that subtle setting? As I say, I don't think we can really see much there. Let me just drive it a little bit harder. So I'm going to turn up the level of that sine wave much harder, and now we can see all of these additional harmonics being added in the subtle mode. But you do have to drive it very, very hard indeed. So do I think that this is a pass or a fail? Well, I'm actually going to give this feature a fail. First of all, I'm not sure that we really needed it when we've got so many other plugins with so much more control over the harmonics which are being added. It just feels to me like it's there. Most of us are not going to be able to hear it unless we drive it super, super hard, and that might not be what we want to do with our signal. We don't have any control over driving like a side chain or anything like that. So maybe a nice idea, definitely in my opinion not implemented well enough for my needs. I've got plenty of other saturation plugins that will do much better than this. You can get to the new instance list by clicking on the name of your track at the bottom of the plugin, and then you'll be able to see all of the instances of Pro Q4 in your project, and when you play your project you'll see them in action. Now, I was scrolling through them there by using the navigation bar on the right hand side, but you can also go over the instances themselves, and when you hover your mouse over in this particular mode, the one you're hovered over will enlarge like so, and you can go in and make changes. Now, this looks really nice and you can scroll through using your mouse like so, but in my opinion it's just nice eye candy. It actually slows you down a little bit, you'll find, when you really want to jump in and make quick changes. The fact that it's still animating when you go to do that means that you can't be quite accurate. So I right away, after just like a minute or two, switched it off because I found it annoying by using this button at the top here. You can zoom in and out manually overall by using this zoom control, and you know, around about here would be okay for me. I can still go in and make any changes I want to make, but if I really wanted to zoom into this one to make changes, then I could just use this little icon up here to zoom into that particular one, but I don't find myself needing to do that all that much. Now, some of the things you can do, where you saw me add a new band there, and you can make basic adjustments to your band. You can also do things like, say, switch on collision detection. So I'll switch it on with this guitar up here. We'll play our track. Please believe me, though and you can see there with those sort of red indicators where we may have some frequencies masking each other between that guitar and that vocal. That's very, very handy indeed. A feature which has been in this plugin for a long time, of course. Now, one of the things I find particularly handy is this, the fact that you can pin particular instances to work on them. So let's say I want to work on these two vocals here. I could pin this one and pin this one like so, and then filter them like this. So click on that, and then I can just work on the particular instances I want to work on. And you may not discover this right away. I didn't, I know that, but there is an option to save sets of pinned instances. So let's just get rid of those for a moment. I've already saved some sets, so I'm going to go up here and select pin sets, and I'm going to go for, say, guitars, which I set up earlier. And once I do that, it's now pinned all the guitars, and if I filter using this button up here, then I can work just with the guitars. Or if I now go to, say, vocals, I can work with vocals only. I find that is very useful when you're working on a reasonably large project. So navigating all through the whole list every time and pinning them and unpinning them does get a little bit time consuming. There's a few other features in here. For example, you can do EQ matching between our different instances, and we can even use the new draw feature. So I'll just use that on the side here and draw a curve in. We'll be talking about that in more detail later on, but there's a few handy features that you've got here. Is this a pass or a failure? Well, I'm going to say this is a pass. There's several ways in which I could see it being enhanced, but I think for this version, it's just enough. I think it is very useful, and it saves you from always swapping from one plugin to another on a different track. So I've set up this dynamic EQ band here in the middle, the blue one that is, and I'm now going to switch it to the new Spectral Dynamic type by clicking on this icon down here. Now with Spectral Dynamics, the plugin is going to listen or look for specific frequencies that it thinks might be sort of unwanted, and it's going to dynamically reduce them as we play the material. So let's sort of look and listen to that in action with this vocal here.
I know that it's impossible for a mortal soul like me to cross whatever separates.
So you can see it working away there, reducing specific frequencies. And we have a bit of control over this. If we look down the bottom here, we'll expand this area again. We can see, for example, that we can make it more or less dense. So kind of more or less detailed, if you like. So I'll put that up to fully detailed, I guess, if you like. Have a listen.
I know that it's impossible for a mortal soul like me.
And then less dense.
To cross whatever separates, to cross what we can see.
And you can also adjust the attack and release as you can with regular dynamic EQ. So overall, I do think that this is a useful feature. I'm glad they've put it in. But here's the thing, I won't normally use these kind of features unless I think it's really needed. I just wouldn't plaster this across the whole frequency range, switch it on and think, you know, the plugin's going to do all the work for me. It's more of a sort of a problem solving thing for me. So for example, as well as having the regular sibilance on this vocal that you'll find, say, in the 6K range, there's also an annoying little whistle that you can hear on like the S sounds and things. Now, we didn't detect it at the time of recording, so, you know, unless you re-record it, then you're going to try and fix it perhaps. Now, have a listen for it again, and once you hear it, you can't unhear it. It's very high, around about the 11K range, and it's kind of a whistly sound, perhaps through the teeth. Have a listen.
I know that it's impossible for a mortal soul like me to cross whatever separates, to cross what we can see.
So it's fairly prominent and quite annoying once you hear it. So this is the kind of thing that I might use this for, and I put it roughly in the range that I'm working in, switch it on, and then let the plugin find those problem frequencies for me. Have a listen now.
I know that it's impossible for a mortal soul like me to cross whatever separates, to cross what we can see.
So I think it's really helped to clean that up and get rid of that really high whistly sound. And that's where I think this is very useful indeed. It could be used in all kind of different frequency ranges where you've got particular problems where you want to dynamically adjust them. And that's why I'm giving this feature a really big pass. I've got to be honest, I virtually never use presets with EQ in my projects, but they have updated the presets feature, so I guess we should take a look at it. You can find it at the top here, and if you click like so, it reveals this browser. Now this is a bit fancier than just a bunch of saved presets, in the sense that you can have them in these different folders here, but as you go into each of them, as you can see on the right hand side, you can do things like add notes and add tags and things like that, which I guess is going to make it easier to find your presets if you're searching for them, which I never am. Let's talk about why I'm never looking for a preset. I'm going to go down to the vocal section here and choose lead vocal or vocal lead one. Let's say I'd recorded my lead vocal and I think, hey, I'll EQ it now. So here's number one. I'll click on it and we come up with this curve like so. There's a few bands in here, fairly subtle ones, I guess. And then, for example, there's this notch here, yeah, at just over 2000 hertz, right? Well, does my lead vocal need that notch? Depends on so many things. It depends on my voice, the room, the microphone, the mic preamp, other processing that may come before this EQ. It's so weird to me that you would just have that in there for a lead vocal. You're most likely going to need to take it out a lot of the time. So I don't know, it doesn't quite make sense to me. I add bands as they're required depending on the material I'm working with. I know I sound less than enthusiastic, don't I? Well, I'm still going to give this a pass or a fail. You may think I'm going to give it a fail because I don't use it, but I think if you do use presets, then this is a really nice little browser to use. So in that sense, I'm going to give it a pass, but it's only just, I don't think it was work that they needed to work on. In my opinion, maybe they had feedback from their users stating otherwise. Having said that, I am going to use this preset feature to demonstrate something about another feature a little bit later on. Don't forget, if you want to release your music to places like Spotify, Amazon, Google Play, etc., follow the VIP link in the description down below to our sponsor, DistroKid. If you do follow that link, you'll get 7% off of your first year of membership. One of the more sexy new features is the EQ Sketch tool. You can access it at the bottom left here, and once you've activated it, you can just go in and draw some fairly complex EQ curves like so. And if nothing else, you end up with some really nice eye candy. But how useful is this actually? Do you remember earlier on I talked about the fact I don't like presets because I need to actually hear the particular material before I make any adjustments with EQ? Whilst I still stand by that statement, there are some fairly common EQ curves that I will use. So for example, I might think to myself, you know what, with acoustic guitar, I always do a low cut down here somewhere, for example, and then I'll usually have a little dip in the middle to get rid of some of the honkiness, and I'll often use then a high shelf to add some sparkle to it. This is a fairly common curve, and then once I've done that in a second, I guess, or less, using that EQ Sketch feature as I did then, I could go in and make my final adjustments. And that's where it all gets a little bit sticky for me, because you definitely will have to make some final adjustments, and they're going to take you some time depending on the material, depending on if you have some specific problems, etc. So yeah, you get this initial setup which takes a second or two, but you're going to be tweaking. And in my mind, it's just a little bit more accurate if you do want to do this, to use a preset. So you just go up to the top here, you click on a guitar in this case, and I am done. And this for me probably creates a better starting point than I've been able to create with the new EQ Sketch tool so far. I feel like it's a lovely feature for marketing, for creating nice looking videos for YouTube, and indeed it is fun to use for about the first minute or so, but once you realize that presets are probably still a little bit quicker, it does feel just a little bit sort of pointless, if I'm honest with you. So I'm actually going to give the new EQ Sketch feature a fail. I just don't think it's necessary. So one of the things you'll do with your curves is adjust the slope and how steep it is. So for example, on this low cut I've got over here, I can select from many different values. I'll go down to the bottom here. You can see normally you would have 12, 18, 24, etc. You can go all the way, of course, up to brick wall, and you can see how that changes things there. Now, in the past, you couldn't choose values in between, say 12 and 18, but now you can. If you just click on the value at the bottom and use your mouse wheel, you can see there I can get all these values, like say 12.5 here, in between the sort of default values, if you like. So this is the new continuous slope feature, and I am going to give it, slightly reluctantly, I'm going to say, a pass. And it is a pass because, well, it works, it does what it says on the box, it's implemented reasonably well, and if it's useful to you, then you're going to find it useful. But I've never really thought to myself, gosh, I wish there was something in between 12 and 18. I've never needed to be quite that accurate, but maybe you do need to be that accurate in specific circumstances, and that's why I've given it a pass. With Pro Q4 we have a new filter called the All Pass filter. I've got it applied here to a bass guitar, and what I'm going to do is play that bass guitar part. I'm going to make adjustments to this filter, and I want you to see if you can hear any difference as I'm making those adjustments. Now, with a bit of luck, you couldn't hear any difference, even when I was making quite dramatic changes. And that's because this is making adjustments to phase. And it's pretty difficult to detect changes in phase unless we're hearing something else as well, if phases of different instruments are kind of interacting with each other. So the best way to demonstrate this is to actually completely duplicate that bass guitar track. So I've done that already, and I've actually turned the overall volume down because as soon as you duplicate something, it gets a little bit louder. But I've only actually got this plugin applied to one of those bass guitar tracks. So let's listen to it again, and I'm going to make similar changes again and listen to see what difference you can hear now. Lots and lots of difference, yeah, and that's because we're shifting the phase with that particular frequency range. You probably heard a really big difference around about the fundamental down there is where you heard the most dramatic difference, but also as I really widen the Q there, yeah, we basically get a whole bunch of phase cancellation sounding like this. And basically that's what this utility of a filter is doing for us. Now, of course, as I say, on just individual instruments, you may or may not hear much difference. But when phase is either interacting with different instruments, or if you've maybe sent the signal from an instrument off to a bus, you know, there's been some processing and things on that bus, you may get some phase issues, then this could be a really useful tool in my opinion. And so from me, it gets a pass. You know, over the years, I've come to have extremely high expectations from FabFilter. And I guess that's why it's a little bit disappointing that I've been able to find any fault at all. They're that good, and by anyone else's standards, this would be the pinnacle of their success. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. I'm Mike. I hope you're well, and I'll see you in the next video.